Hey guys, and welcome back to Bayside Online. My name is Morgan Truel, and I will be your host today. And I am so glad that you made it to service. Wherever you're watching from, whatever time you're watching this, you are a part of our Bayside Online family. And we want to hear who you are, how you got here, and what's encouraging you about being a part of Bayside. What are you loving from the messages? What are you loving from the series? Today, we actually have Pastor Mark Clark back, and he is taking us into the end of our mini-series entitled Habits of a Healthy Heart. It's been an encouraging series for us. We hope it's been encouraging and challenging for you, and we're going to get into today's service. So we're so glad that you're here. We hope that you've got your Bibles, your journals, your pens. Let's get ready for service.
All right, how y'all doing? Doing good? Good to have you. Good to have you. Welcome to Bayside. Glad you're here. My name is Mark. I'm one of the pastors around here. Good to have you all. If you got a Bible, Matthew chapter 25. If you don't, grab your bulletin out. We are going to be this is the second week of this little series, 2-week series. Next week, we are back to the book of Acts. This is Habits of a Healthy Heart. And if you got your bulletin, take it out, because I am going to talk to you about 3 areas of your life called time, treasure, and talent. I'm sure you've never heard those phrases before, and this is all new material. But we want it. Well, clearly you haven't. I don't know. This is not unique. This isn't something maybe that you've heard for the first time, but it is something that we need to drill down on in life, that God has given us these 3 things, and the question of them is how we actually steward them in our life. Because here's the way the universe works. There's a way that the universe works. There's a way that us as human beings are designed, that if we actually take something and move it mechanically, there's certain buttons you can press, there's certain ways that you can live that actually have a result in your life. There's certain habits that you do that if you do them, there's a certain result that actually takes place in your life. So it's very much like music, right? There's a musical instrument, and there's a way, if you play it right, you actually get a beautiful sound. But if you play it wrong, right, then you get the kid in the clarinet, and he comes home and, grade 5, and he's like, Wee! And you're like, oh gosh, please stop. I don't even care if you fail. Just stop playing that dumb clarinet in the house, right? So it's just it can be screeching to the ears. And that's the reality when it comes to the thing called life. It's how do you play it so that it flourishes versus failing in life? There was when I was a youth pastor, there was a night, I remember the kids came up to me, they're like, hey, Pastor Mark, our drummer never showed up tonight for the worship service. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll be the drummer. That looks easy. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'll start drumming. So I went back there, and they were playing, Pharaoh. Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Remember that song? Oh, baby, let my people go. Yeah, whatever. And so, I don't know why I just did that, but that's the song they were singing, I remember. And I was like, yo, I'll just play some drums. So I'm back there, never played drums in my life. And they're up there just stop doing that, right? My buddy's like, Reh! And they're looking back at me like people were losing their faith in the audience. It was crazy. It was bad news, man. It was bad news. So you play an instrument, you don't play it well, then it goes bad. If you play it well, it sounds beautiful, and that's like life. There's certain things, if you do them, your life has way more of a chance of flourishing than floundering in life. And so this is going to be less a sermon and more like a teaching, like a 35-minute TED talk, where we're going to just go through some mechanics of some things and talk about these 3 areas of life and really try to flourish in them. And the first thing is to understand that when it comes to time, treasure, and talent, that we are what the Bible would call stewards of these things. We don't own time. Really, you don't even own your money. It was given to you. You don't own your treasure and talent because you're stewards of them. You didn't create them. And there's a difference between being an owner and being a steward of something that somebody gave you, right? And so once in a while, we'll go traveling. And whenever we go traveling, we need somebody to come and stay at our house to take care of our dogs. We got 2 crazy dogs. They got to make sure they don't die. They got to fed. The house, the house is okay. And so every time we go away, we have a kid come and stay at our house, some 20-year-old, kid from Thrive College or something like that. And they come and stay at our house and feed our dogs and whatever. And we were just away a week ago. Wouldn't it be weird if we got a kid to come and stay at our house to take care of our house? Hey, Tom, we need you to come, feed the dogs, make sure the house is safe. And we came home after a week, and the dogs hadn't eaten, and they destroyed our house, and the house was a disaster. And we came home. It'd be odd if we said, well, what happened, Tom? He's like, oh, oh, sorry, I didn't realize I thought this was my place. That'd be odd, right? Because it ain't Tom's place and I'd have to slap him for the cause of Christ. And be like, Tom, this ain't your house. These ain't your dogs. You were a steward of something I owned for a time. And the question is, what did you do with the thing that had been given to you? That is literally what God does with these three areas of our life. He's like, you don't own time. You don't even own your money. You can't make your own money, right? If you make your own money in your house, it's not worth anything. The money fluctuates around and then you get some of it. And the question at the end of the day is, how did you spend it? What did you do with these three areas of life? How were you a steward of them? So here's the parable that Jesus tells. Matthew chapter 25. It's a beautiful story about the three guys and the way that they stewarded something, right? And so Matthew chapter 25, one of the famous parables of Jesus. And I want you to listen to it. It's a lot of verses. So we're just going to hone in. We're going to use this as the backdrop of this whole message. So we're just going to go through the whole parable at once. I'm not going to comment on anything because we wouldn't get very far in it. We just need to hear the story. A lot of verses. I know usually I just get jacked up about but Paul, and then that's 35 minutes. But that's not what we're going to do today, okay? Listen to this story. Picture yourself, you're in the first century, it's dusty, and this guy Jesus walks up, and he's got his beard, and he gathers this crowd of people. And the way he got their attention and the way he told us spiritual things about our life is he told stories. And here's the story he tells. Listen to this. Verse 14 of Matthew 25. It will be, meaning the kingdom, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one, he gave 5 bags of gold. Now, these bags of gold, I know I said I wasn't going to say anything, but so usually this parable is called the parable of the talents. And this modern NIV doesn't say talents because, which is actually super helpful because when we hear talents, we think talents, right? Like, oh, I can sing. That's not. It's literally bags of money. And a talent back then was like a year or of wages. It was a lot of money. So what he does in giving them the 5 bags is probably $1 million of US currency today, right? So when Jesus tells a parable, he's not he doesn't tell these little cheap stories, right? Like a guy got $3 from his mommy and then, it's like, here's a bag of $1 million, 5 million, boom, 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 boom. So the audience would be like, $5 million? We can't even eat. Who is this guy? So I like how they did this. Bag of gold. To another, he gave 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey, and the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. He hid it. Picture it. He hid his time. He hid his money. He hid his talents, right? The 3 things we're going to talk about. He hid them out of fear. And after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and what? Faithful servant. This is the words we all want to hear when we die and we meet God face to face. We want to hear him say, well done, good and faithful servant, right? This is what he's talking about. So he's alluding to this life where he did something with the money. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the man with 2 bags does the exact same thing. And he made money on it, so the master gives him more. Then the 3rd man comes in, verse 24, who had received 1 bag. And he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed. All right, so he's got this little critical, right? He's like he's a 20-year-old. Right? He's like, I know the way the world works. Right? So I was afraid and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. I hid it out of fear. See, here is what belongs to you. And he hands it back the 1 bag. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvested where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed? Well, then You should have put my money deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have at least got interest. Take the bag of gold from him. Give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Welcome to Bayside. Glad you're here. What did you do with your 5 bags of money? The one who scoured it, put him in hell, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Aren't you glad he came to church? It's such a beautiful morning. All right, so what do we do with this? We steward 3 things in our life that are very important. 3 things so that on the last day, when we stand before God and he says, what did you do with your life? We're able to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, rather than you lazy, wicked, selfish servant. And that is most true about these 3 areas of life. The first, let's talk about these. The first is time. Time. How often do you think about what you do with your time? I love how often the Bible talks about time. What'd you do with your time? Funny thing is about time is we all in a day have the exact same amount of it, right? It's very interesting. Everybody in this room has a different amount of money. Everybody in this room has a different amount of influence, a different amount of power, but all of us have the exact same amount of time in a given day, 24 hours. And the question is what you do with it. It's almost like I was thinking about this, almost analogous to like voting, right? In America, you guys know you have an election coming up? Have you heard about this? There's a couple people running against each other, right? Gonna get crazy. So it's gonna be fine. Everything will be fine. Jesus is reigning and ruling and he's in charge. So, but all of you in America, I as a Canadian, the one thing I can't do down here is vote for either of these people. But you can all vote. Now, the interesting thing is whether you make $100 million a year or whether you make $1,000 a year, when you get into that voting booth, both of you have the same amount of power. You both have one vote. One vote. No matter how much you make, no matter what your role is in society, you get one vote. This is what is interesting about time. We all get the same amount of it. 24 hours in a day. The question is, what do you end up doing with it? The Bible talks about time all the time. So teach us to number our days so that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. So here's what he's saying. If we have a philosophy where we know the number of our days, then we're going to be wise people. Meaning, let's live our life backward from the end. Not to be too morbid with you, but just think about this for a second. One of the things that I don't want to happen in my life is that on my dying bed that I don't regret my life. Right? I don't want to be sitting, because here's the thing, for every single one of us, we will have that moment when we are sitting in the hospital room and there's a machine and it's beeping and it's keeping us alive, and it's 3:00 in the morning, and no one's there to visit you because they're back home sleeping, and the hospital hallways are dead quiet because no one's out there, and the veil between you and eternity becomes so thin, and there's going to be this question, what did I do with my life? Because here's what matters. You're about to meet the master, and he's gonna say, what did you do with your life? Because how many of us know it's not about starting something, it's about how you what? Finish. Anybody, any moron can get married. It's not hard, right? You put on a little tuxedo, you fool a girl for a year or two into liking you. I'll be there for you, honey. Yeah, I'm a great guy. And then you got her there on that day, and she's in her little wedding dress, and you're in your little tuxedo, and you get up there, and you start to talk to each other. Oh, I love you, Tommy. I wrote you a poem. Tommy, T, you're tenacious. Oh, opportunistic, whatever. All right, and this is why I hate when people write their own vows. Because you're listening to these two people say, I'll always, you're the best, you're the best, and they can't keep their hands off each other. And you just want to go, just fast forward 10 years, brother. All right, fast forward 10 years. We'll see if little Tommy's so tenacious, all right? These two fools are ignorant of what is coming in their life. This is my wedding sermon, by the way. This is what I say the day of, I'm like, we have gathered for these two morons who are gonna hate each other for half of their life and argue about the TV channel. We have gathered today. Thank you for your $100 gift. So, barely paid for dinner, by the way. All you cheap guests. No, I don't actually say any of that. But these people, but the question of a marriage, of course, a question of a marriage is not about the first day. It's not about the wedding day. It's about the last day. How are you? How is your marriage on the last day, not the first day? And it's the same with our life. It's when you meet Jesus, he's gonna ask you, man, how did you get to the last day? When you stepped across eternity and you are in my presence, let's look back at your life and see whether you were faithful to the end. The question of time, right? Paul talks about this, Colossians 4, be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity, making the most of your time, making the most of everything you do in life. One of the great fears I have in life is to get to the end and I wasted my time, right? It's like that scene in Schindler's List where right at the end, he like pulls his ring off and he's like, I could have saved 5 more people if I'd sold this ring. And this car over here, I could have saved 20 families if I would have sold this car, right? He gets to the end of the whole thing and he's like, I could have done more. I could have done more. And that's the question of your life. So I did some math on my life, in all of our lives. So I looked this up. The average American life span of a human being, man or woman, the average is what? Do you guys know? 70 what? 75. No, not 75. 72, no. 78, no. We're close enough. All right, 77, we're running out of time here. You guys got to go to lunch. All right, so 77 is the average age of an American in 2024. You will live 77 years. Now, some of you are going to live longer than that. Some of you won't live that long, right? That's why it's called an average, right? My grandfather lived to 100 years old. My other grandfather lived to 97. My other grandmother lived till she was 96. So I'm going to be probably pretty good, all right? I'm just going to go along, keep ticking. I come from good stock, right? But some of you don't. So some of you right now, you're close to 77. Some of you are past 77. You are living on borrowed time, all right? That's your reality. Okay, now, 77 years old. Now, I am a 44-year-old man, which means I only have how many years to live? What? 33 years to live. That's it. That means I got 33 Christmases. I only got 33 Christmases left. Man, some of you are like, this is the most depressing sermon I've ever been in my life. How many more Saturdays do I have to get up and cut the grass and have a nice cup of coffee, sit around the backyard and just like write a sermon for you fine people, right? I got 1,644 Saturdays left in my life to spend time with my family, to hang out. How many more days do I have to live? 11,688 days. Now, but the question is like, okay, but a day, I mean, you sleep 8 of those, and then you work another 8 of them, technically, so you really only have 8 hours to do what you want, right? Like even like this hour right here, I gotta be here with you, all right? It's not what I want to be doing, it's like, yeah. So, I mean, this isn't like me hanging with my family playing a game or going golfing or kind of talking to my neighbors. You know, it's not that. It's work. So this is, you get 8 hours to sleep and 8 hours to work and 8 hours to kind of do what you want. So how many hours do I have left to actually do the things I want to do? About 93,000 left in my life. 93,000 free hours to make an impact for the world. So the question becomes, what are you going to do with that time? What am I going to, and God is going, I want you to impact people for the kingdom. I want you to actually do some great things. And I read this a while ago, when you start to think about your life and how much time you spend on social media and on your phone and, you know, in front of a screen instead of out in the world doing things. I read this quote a couple years ago, and the writer said this. He said, one of the purposes of Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Snapchat and all these things. One of the purposes of those things on Judgment Day is going to be that we had no excuse for prayerlessness. Woo! That's convicting. Because when I stand before God, the master, and he says, I gave you time. What did you do with it? And I said, wow. And he says, let's go through. How was your prayer life? How was your Bible reading life? Well, I was a pastor, so I was busy. Good point. Hey, Jesus, can you pull up that Instagram account and see how many hours he logged? Scrolling, nonsense. How much time do you spend on Amazon shopping for junk he doesn't need? Let's just pull it up. No, we're good. Anyway, so, right? It's time. What did you do with your actual time? I was in the room with a leader this week, and he said this great little phrase, and it was hit me super profound. He says, life is short and life is long. Write that down in your notes. You'll come back to that. It's actually pretty genius. Life is short and life is long. What he means by that is life is really short. Like, how many of us just remember, those of us who have kids, how many of you have kids in this room, right? How many of you remember when they were just little babies, right? Just little useless, sucking resources from your life, babies, and they have nothing to offer you, and they're just babies. And so it was yesterday, right? And then they're gone. They're gone, and they used to be just this little. Then they grow up and they get an attitude, right? And it's like my oldest daughter, like she was born in 2006. I mean, remember 2006, right? She was born, remember when Casino Royale came out, right? That's when she was born, right? That's how I think. Like, when did this movie come out, right? That's what it was like, right? 007, he's running around. That was when my baby was born. Actually, I took her to the movie. I realized it was very loud and her little ears couldn't handle it, so Aaron had to leave. It was fantastic, by the way. So anyways, that's a true story. But I remember this little baby in 2006, and she was born, and Aaron had to go. She had a C-section, so she went off, and she was like recovering, and I was left with this little child, and I didn't know what to do. I'd never, men, 24-year-old boys don't tend to hold a lot of babies, right? They don't like girls do. Like in church, all the babies get passed around, but you rarely see like a 24-year-old boy just like, yeah, this ain't my baby, but I'm just hanging out with it, right? So I didn't know really what to do with this baby. I'm like, oh my gosh, and it was crying, and the mother was gone. So I'm like, oh, and I took my little finger, I'm like, boop, and it's like I solved parenting. I was like, this ain't that hard. And then she started yelling back at me about stuff and grinding her shoes down my dashboard in my car and telling me she doesn't know what time she's gonna get home. That was yesterday. She was a baby. Just 2 seconds ago. It goes by so fast, right? And life is so vulnerable. The book of James says that life is what? It's like a vapor. It's gone. And it's so fragile. You think you're so important. You think the Bible goes, no, you're a blade of grass. You pop up and you disappear. You're gone, man. And nobody's gonna care that you're gone. And here's what I mean. Remember a couple months ago, I gave you the image that if I held up a picture of your great-grandfather, you wouldn't even recognize him. If I showed you a photo right now with 5 people lined up and said, pick out your great-grandfather, none of you could do it. Why? See, here's what you think in your mind. You think, but I'm different. You see, my great-grandkids, they're going to be sitting around talking about me, boy. Come on, Sally, put on that video of old Papa Clark up there. Come on, he was on the YouTube. Put it on there. Let's all sit around and talk about his genius. Read a passage from the Problem of God, Sally. They're not even going to know my name. What's your great-grandfather's name? You don't know, because this is what life is like. It's a vapor. It's gone. It's gone. And the question is, as one writer I read years ago, he said, you know what your life goal should be? Preach Christ, die, and be forgotten. Because that's the humility of it. That's life. And so this question is, what are you going to do with your time? And I think when we look at our cultural situation and all the depression and all the isolation and all the anxiety, I think it's partly to do with what we do with our time. I looked up some stats. Do you know how long the average American spends on social media on their phone every day? The average American on their phone, on social media, every day is 4 hours and 37 minutes. Okay? Now, remember that's average. So that takes the 80-year-olds into consideration as well. If you come down to Gen Z, 6 hours and 5 minutes every single day. You know what that adds up to for their life? 14 years. 14 years of your life spent on a phone, scrolling some stuff. 14 years. Now, I'm not thinking that by writing this up here, you just went, you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore. It's just, I have been healed. I shall never look again at the Snapchat. I don't think you're going to do that. But here's what I ask. Navigate it wisely. Jesus has this great principle of life. I love his sentence in Matthew chapter 10. He says this, and I love this for social media. He says, you are sheep among wolves. Be shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves. Use it strategically, but you be innocent. Let your brain be righteous. Don't look at fleshly images that destroy your brain. Don't look at stuff that makes you more greedy, that envies people. When it starts doing destructive things to you, don't do that. Be innocent as doves, man. That's what he's saying. He's laying it out for us. What you do with your time is going to be evaluated at the end of time. I remember, you guys know Bob Goff. You probably read Love Does. Many of you have read Love Does. He tells this great story in that book that always kind of hit me. He was like a student, and he was struggling in life, and he had this youth leader, and he would constantly go to this youth leader, and he'd hang out with them, and they'd go for coffee, and they'd talk through life. And he was just going through this really depressing, anxious time in his life. And he showed up at the youth leader's door, and he knocks on the door. He's like, hey, man, I just feel like I got to get out of here, go camping somewhere, hang out for a week. I just got to get out of Dodge. Could you come with me, man? Like, can you help me? Can you mentor me? And the guy just looks at him, he goes, yeah, Bob, I can do that. And he goes back in, he packs a bag, and he comes out to the car, and they take off, and they spend a week out in the desert and hanging out, Oregon or someplace, and they tent, and they look at the stars, they talk about God, and that whole trip made Bob Goff get back on track with God. And when he got back to the house, he walked up to the house, and as he looked in the window, Bob was bringing this guy his tent and stuff up, he saw all these gifts that were unwrapped just sitting in his house. And he's like, what is this? It was the middle of the summer. It wasn't Christmas. And as he opened the door, a young woman walked out and said, oh, hello, Bob. And he's like, whoa, hi. And he introduced himself. And the guy walked up and she kisses, hi, honey. And he walked in and he'd realized that this guy had just gotten married. And he just got back from his honeymoon with his wife the day that Bob walked up and knocked on his door. He got back to his house and they hadn't unwrapped their wedding gifts yet. And this guy, without even thinking about it, says, here's what I'm going to do with my time. I'm going to spend it with a lost Bob Goff, a student who needs me in this moment. Maybe more than my marriage does. Now, I'm sure he's learned his lesson since, and he would never leave his wife. It's like, what an idiot. That guy needs counseling. But the beautiful question about what you do with your time. Okay, we're running out of time. Second point. Second point is treasure. How many of us love to talk about money in church? Yeah, what's up? That's what I'm talking about. Woo! All right, so we got to go a few minutes on this because it's very important. 3 principles of life really quick. Money is a heart thing. Money is a heart thing. Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your what? Your heart will be also. Your money is connected to your heart. So here's the reality. If I want to know what you love in life, I am not going to ask you because you're going to lie to me. This is what Jesus is saying. Your treasure is where your heart is. So if I ask you, what do you love? What are you jacked up about in life? I don't want to hear about the songs that you sing in your car. I don't want, but I listen to Hillsong all the time. I love the Lord. No. I want to ask you what your credit card receipt says. Because that's what you love. That's what Jesus is saying. He's going, guys, your money is what you love. Your money is what you prioritize in life. And you can say all you want. I love the church. The church blesses me. But if you don't give to the church, you don't love the church. It's an easy equation. You give money toward what you love, period. That's what Jesus is saying. So Aaron and I, from a very early age, decided, okay, we're going to have to give to the church. So we had this principle in our mind. It was a principle of 90 is greater than 100. That we're going to live our life like this. 90% of our money is going to go to the local church. It's better than taking 100% of the money and keeping it for ourselves, because we read the Bible and it said you got to give 10% to the local church, and then over and above that, you support kids in Africa and do all this other stuff. So that's what we do, and we've always lived on 90% and given 10%, even when it was 10% of nothing. Like I was going to school, she was working in this, and she was and I had to go to school and spend a whole bunch of money, and we had nothing. Because here's the principle. God, how many of you know this? The only time in the Bible, you've heard this before, where God says, test me, is with money. He says, I dare you to be more generous. I dare you, because I'll catch you every time. And you guys know this. When you step up and you're generous, God catches you. How many times Aaron and I said, we don't have any money, we're not going to be able to eat, and some doorbell, ding dong. It's like, what's that? You know, we go to the door, it's like, hey, you paid too much car insurance. Here's $1,000 back. It's like, what? All of these crazy, cool stories happen when you step out and you're generous. And this is why Jesus says it's a heart issue. It's a worship issue. It's a spiritual issue. Second principle is this: trust God, not money. Trust God, not money. He's going, you're only going to serve one. You cannot serve both God and money. One of those two is actually going to be your God. And the question is, which one is it in your life? Do you know that this is an issue of worship? And the only way to ever get free from the slavery of money is to be generous. So there was a story I read of a little village that was wrestling. It had this problem where all these little monkeys would come down out of their trees and they would destroy everybody's huts and steal all their food and all this stuff. And like, what are we going to do about these monkeys? And they tried everything, tried to shoot them or whatever, and they run off. So finally, this social scientist came in. He's like, I know what to do about these monkeys. This is easy. So he got a coconut and he cut a hole, very small hole in the top of the coconut. And he took a bunch of grapes and he put them inside the coconut. And then he took the coconut and he chained it to a tree. And he said, okay, now let's just sit back and watch for a second. And these little monkeys went down and they looked at the coconut and they're like, I want those grapes. And they'd stick their little arm in there and they'd grab the grapes. And then they'd go to pull their hand out, but you couldn't pull your hand out and have the grapes because you got to have the fist. You got to let go of the grapes and get out. But they couldn't do it. I want them grapes. And they would hold them grapes. And they would just come with a little bag and they'd put it over the monkey's head and they would go do something with it. I don't know what they would do. Let's set it free in the wilderness to live a fantastic life and have many grandchildren. Whatever it was, the only way that monkey could get free is, what did he have to do? He let go of the grapes, man. Some of you are in such slavery to money. The only solution is you got to let go of it, man. You got to be more generous. You got to be like, what? And here's what I love. The Apostle Paul, he's like, hey, it's not even good enough to give it. You got to give it what? Generously and cheerfully. I love this. God loves, don't you want to be loved by God? A what? Cheerful giver. If some of you are jacked up, tell your face because you don't look happy to give it. We should be jacked up. We should be like, I get to give. I get to give. Not like, I've got to give to the church. Give to the church. God's like, that doesn't even count, man. I want you to be cheerful. I want you to be so jacked up. You get online. You see this little thing in the back of your thing? We even made it easy. It's 8 steps. So You get online and you go, okay, I'm going to give this much a month. When you press all those buttons, you should be like, 50,000, 1,000, 100,000, 500,000. Honey, we're giving more away. It shouldn't be like, $100. Church always wants my money. Cheerful, because the amount of things that are going on. Do you understand? We baptized 1,100 people in the last year at this church. 1,100. That is crazy. That is what your money does. That's why you give it cheerfully. That's why you're like, this is fun to give, because it funds ministry. We have business leaders in this room. We saw 36 guys get baptized at our Folsom prison campus 2 weeks ago. Prisoners in Folsom prison. That's the stuff your money funds and goes toward. Having great staff, having great events, reaching kiddos for Jesus, 5,000 kids at Breakaway. It's like, what? That's why it's cheerful, but it also needs to be generous. And some of you are like, I am generous. So here's the thing about generosity. You know what's interesting about generosity? It's all relative. So Jesus tells this really crazy, convicting, there's this crazy moment in the Gospels where remember the widow's mite story? Right, you've heard that story? Where this widow walks up to the temple and she gives her 2 pennies. And a mite was what she gave, and it was like the smallest amount of currency. And she gives it into the temple, and it was the only 2 she had left, so she gave it. And she walks away, and Jesus goes, you see that woman? She just gave more than anybody here. Why does he say that? Why does he say that? Because obviously, technically, she didn't give more. Why did he say that? Because here's the principle. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright, here's what he points out. This is convicting. He said, here's the principle of that story about the widow's mite. It's not about how much she gave. It's about how much she kept for herself, which was nothing. The question is, how much do you keep? How much do you need? Some of you are like, well, you know what? I gave, whatever, choose a number. Okay, let's choose a crazy number, just like the parable of Jesus, $1 million. I gave $1 million. Yeah, but you have 100 million. Now it's not generous, it's cheap. Because you kept 99 for yourself. You don't need 99, bro. I know. I'm not trying to be. I know. I said I wouldn't tell anybody, so I'm sorry. You don't need 99 for 2 more houses or whatever you're saying. Now forget it. Some of you are like, well, I'm off the hook. I ain't got no 100 million. Yeah, but you got 1,000 and you only gave $1 or $10. See, so what are you doing? This is all about God going, I want you to be generous and I want you to be cheerful in what you do to make ministry happen. Okay, last one, talent. Some of you are like, whew, thank goodness. Do not like talking about money. So, here's the thing about talent, really quickly. God has given every single one of you talents. He's given you abilities. Some of you are artists. You need to take that art and use it for the kingdom, because one day God is going to say, what did you do with the art wiring I gave you? Some of you are money people. Some of you are great at keeping a home. Some of you are great leaders. Some of you are great, whatever it is that God has wired you. And this is why I think this is the funnest one to talk about. This is the most important one to talk about in regard to finding out what you're going to do in life. What is your calling in life? How are you going to impact the world around you? Chase the talents that God's given you, and you will find out what God has put you on earth to do. My daughters, they're musical. So what are they doing? They're using their music for kingdom stuff. They're leading worship and youth ministry. It's unbelievable to watch people figure out, here's the talents I've been given. How am I going to use them for the kingdom? So here's the question. 5 things you can track to figure out what you're called to in life, and then I'll pray for you. The first one is this: spiritual gifts. Every single one of you, if you're a believer, has spiritual gifts. And here's what I'm gonna do. As we go through these, I'm gonna use myself as a case study so that you can understand how this plays out in life. So, spiritual gift. I realized when I became a Christian at 18, 19 years old, God had given me the spiritual gift of preaching and teaching. And it was people coming around me. It's not what I wanted to do with my life. People came around me and said, hey man, I think you could preach and teach. You make the Bible alive. You talk to people, they listen. I think you should preach and teach. We had our youth pastor. He came to me, he's like, hey Mark, I want you to preach this Wednesday. Listen, here's the one principle. I was not ready. I literally, that Wednesday that I preached, I was in the back behind the church smoking a cigarette. All right, kids, open up your Bible to Matthew chapter 5. Right? That was literally what I was doing. Smoking my cigarettes with my chain attached to my wallet. I don't want anyone to steal my money. Don't touch my $10. Whee! I was not ready, and yet God had decided to give me some spiritual gifts. Even though I'm not ready, I'm kind of still not ready, right? Back then I wasn't the righteous pastor before you that you see. What? You know what, it's funny, so it's kind of weird. The other day, this woman at our the golf tournament that the church had to raise a bunch of money to send kiddos to Mexico, so cool. She had a post there at one of the holes, one of her companies, and she's like, "Oh, Pastor Mark, I love you." And my dad, he's 85 years old, and he comes to church. He's like, "Who's preaching?" "Oh, I like when that Mark guy's preaching, because if he can go to heaven, then I'm sure I can go too." What? I'm sure she meant it as a compliment, but it was very offensive. Such a weird thing to say to somebody. If that moron could go to heaven, maybe I've got a chance. So I'm still not really ready, but the spiritual gifts. Okay, the second one is heart. What is your heart? What is your heart? What is your heart? If you hate sex trafficking in the greater Sacramento area, maybe God is calling you to do something about it. That's your heart. What is your heart telling you to do? What do you wake up in the morning jacked up either against or for? I want to make the Bible live in your life. I spend every moment of my day trying to figure out how to make the Bible alive for you, to transform your life. God, the Word, and the Word behind the Word, that's what I want to do in my life. That's my heart. That's what I wake up wanting to accomplish in life, and that's what shapes who I am. Okay, thirdly, your abilities. What abilities do you naturally have in life? What abilities has God wired you for, even outside of spiritual gifts? You just have some things that you're good at, right? You have some stuff, and nobody's good at them in the way that you're good at them. You have this unique ability God has given you. So I realize, when I look back at my life, I realize that 5-year-old Mark could always be in a room and tell a story and have any age group listen to it and find it funny. Since I was 5, I could go in a room and tell a story or tell a joke, and a 5-year-old kid would go, "Yeah!" And an 80-year-old man, "Oh, where to go, little one?" Or whatever. And I realized that I could hold people in when I told them these stories. And little 5-year-old Mark tucked it away. And I said, that seems to be a skill that I could use in my life at some point. These are natural abilities that God has wired you for that other people don't necessarily have. What are they in your life? Fourth is your personality. Your personality means you're going to do something in a way other people don't. There's not one way to be a banker. There's not one way to be a stay-at-home mom or dad. There's not one way to be a leader. There's not one way to be a teacher. Right? There's not one way to be a preacher. Like my personality is such that I do it in a certain way, right? So, because are you introverted or are you extroverted? Are you, right? I preach in this kind of jacked up the whole time, and some of you are like, "Gosh, I know. I come from a stressful week, and I come in here, and I don't need, you have a microphone. Do you not know you have a microphone on your face? We can hear you. We don't need you yelling the whole time. I just come in from a busy week. I just need some chill down time, man. Just some calm points. Just give me some points and let it just be, you're so stressed. You're stressing me out, right? And that's because that's my personality. I'm just on edge. I'm extroverted. I'm passionate. I want everyone to come to Christ now. I don't have any time for no monotone, nuanced, whatever. It's like, let's go, right? That's my person. That's what's going through my brain. It's like, this is the last time you're ever going to hear a sermon ever. This week could be the last week you're ever sitting in these seats. You could be gone by next week, or I could. And I have to leave it all out here every single time. But that's my personality. Kevin Thompson doesn't feel that way. He's just like, that's all. It's a personality thing. You just do it different than other people do it. But listen, and then the last one is this, and I'll pray for you. Experiences. Don't think that your experiences, good or bad, don't shape what you end up doing with your life. Because why do I get up here and 60% of the time when I'm preaching, I talk about the fact that my parents got divorced. I'm from a broken home. I got Tourette's syndrome. I got mental health things. Why my dad died when I was 15. Why do I talk about that? Because that's my experience in life. And I bring that experience to bear for the sake of you, right? I don't love talking about that stuff. I'm hoping that you find yourself in it because your life is like that too. And there's people who did things to you. In a room this big, there are experiences that you had. They weren't all good. And the beautiful thing about the death and resurrection of Jesus is he died on a cross and he shed his blood for all the sins that you commit. That's true. But he also did it for the sins that have been done against you. Your experiences when in a room this big, there are abuses. There is shame. There is guilt that when you come in here, you think you are not worthy because of that thing you did or that thing that was done to you. And the cross of Christ cleans you from what they did to you so that you can stand forgiven with a new identity and do what God has you on this planet to do. So that when you stand in front of him on the last day and he looks at you and he says, what did you do with the time, the treasure, and the talent I gave you? That you can hear those words, good and faithful servant, well done. Lord, I do pray that that is our experience in this room. That when we meet you face to face and you ask us about our stewardship of the things you handed us, that we will hear those words from you, empower us to do them well. In Jesus' great name we pray, amen. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching our Bayside online service. We're so glad that you're actually part of our church, which you are, even though you're watching from all over the world, and we have people literally watching from all over the world. You are part of our family, and we want to get to know you. So please make sure you get in touch with us. Let us know your story. We'd love to hear you and serve you in any way we can. Also, part of what drives the way we connect as a church globally is giving. And so if you're part of our family, we would love you to start giving to our church. Those resources, we steward them to reach people all over the world. And we hear amazing stories about what Jesus is doing with your resources. So if you already give, thank you. If not, you can start giving. We would love that. And then finally, we have all kinds of stuff we do. We have a podcast network. We have like 10 podcasts that address a whole bunch of different things in your life. So if you're a podcaster, join us in the Thrive Podcast Network. We'd love to serve you. We've got a ton of stuff there. We just want to make sure that you feel part of our family. So we love you. Thank you so much for being part of this family, and we will see you next week.